Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind howled across the vast prairie like a lonesome wolf, carrying dust and broken promises in its wake. Dawn Evans clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her slender shoulders as she stood at the edge of Timber Creek, watching the first light break over the eastern horizon. At 22, her honey-blonde hair caught the morning sun like spun gold, but her blue eyes had seen enough hardship to dim their sparkle. No sense crying over what cannot be changed, she whispered to herself, a mantra repeated so often it had become her shield against the world. Dawn had learned young that the frontier took more than it gave. After losing her parents to influenza 3 years prior, she'd been left with their failing homestead, mounting debts, and a belief that struck deeper than the roots of the old cottonwood by the creek. Love was a luxury the West afforded to no one. Not really. Not lastingly. Survival demanded everything. There was no room for tender hearts when winter came calling. The small ranch house behind her had seen better days. The roof needed patching before autumn rains. The barn leaned precariously to one side, and the cattle herd had dwindled to a pitiful dozen head. Dawn planned to sell what remained and head east to her mother's cousin in St. Louis, a woman she'd never met, but who had written offering a position as a companion. It wasn't what Dawn wanted, but it was what she needed. Survival above all else. Miss Evans. The voice startled her from her thoughts. Dawn turned to find a young man on horseback, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun. She recognized him immediately as Garrett Finley, newly arrived to work for the Rocking J, the largest ranch in the county. At 26, he cut an impressive figure with broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, light brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and eyes the color of summer sage. A 2-day stubble shadowed his jawline, but his clothes, while worn, were clean and well kept. Mr. Finley, she nodded curtly. What brings you to Evans Creek at this hour? Bringing word from Mr. Jensen. He's hosting a gathering Saturday next. Asked specifically that you attend. He shifted in his saddle, and Dawn noticed how his horse, a magnificent buckskin gelding, responded to the slightest touch of his knee. Please thank Mr. Jensen, but I have preparations to make. I'm leaving Timber Creek soon. Something flickered across Garrett's face. Surprise, perhaps disappointment. Leaving? The whole territory's talking about the railroad coming through. Times are about to change for the better. Dawn smiled without humor. The railroad's been coming through for 3 years, Mr. Finley. I've learned not to stake my future on promises. Sometimes promises are kept, Miss Evans. His gaze held hers for a moment too long, causing her to look away. Sometimes they're worth waiting for. As he tipped his hat and turned his horse, Dawn felt something stir within her chest. An unwelcome flutter she quickly suppressed. The West had taught her one certainty. Attachment led to heartbreak. And Dawn Evans had endured enough heartbreak to last several lifetimes. 3 days later, a sudden spring thunderstorm upended Dawn's careful plans. Lightning struck the old cottonwood, sending a massive branch crashing through her barn roof. Rain poured in, threatening her winter hay stores and the tack she'd hoped to sell. Struggling against the wind and rain, Dawn worked desperately to salvage what she could, dragging heavy canvas over the hole. The sodden material fought her every effort, whipping in the fierce gusts that tore across the prairie. Let me help you with that. The voice came through the storm like an answer to an unspoken prayer. Garrett Finley, drenched to the skin, appeared beside her. Without waiting for permission, he grabbed the edge of the canvas and pulled it taut, securing it with practiced efficiency where Dawn had been struggling. What are you doing here? She shouted over the storm. Bringing strays back to the Rocking J when the storm hit. He secured another corner. Saw your trouble from the rise. Together they worked until the makeshift repair held. Inside the relative shelter of the damaged barn, Dawn pushed wet hair from her face and regarded her unexpected savior. Water dripped from his hat brim and coursed down his face, but his eyes remained fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You did not need to stop, she said, wringing water from her skirt. Would you have preferred I rode by while you were struggling? He removed his hat, shaking water from it. I would have managed, she replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. Garrett looked around the barn, taking in the poor repair, the thin horses, the meager supplies. You are determined to leave, then? There is nothing for me here, Mr. Finley. Garrett, he corrected gently. And I think there's more here than you allow yourself to see. The storm raged outside, But in that moment, something shifted between them, like tectonic plates beneath the Wyoming soil, imperceptible but profound. Dawn felt the ground of her certainties tremble slightly. "You do not know me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I would like to," he answered simply. When the storm passed, he helped repair the damage properly, working alongside her until darkness fell. As he prepared to leave, he asked again about Jensen's gathering. Against her better judgment, Dawn heard herself agree to attend. The Rocking Jay's main house stood as a testament to frontier success. 2 stories of solid timber with glass windows and a wraparound porch where Wyoming's influential gathered in their Saturday best. Dawn felt conspicuously out of place in her mother's refashioned blue gown, too aware of the careful darning at the cuffs. "You came." Garrett appeared at her side, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "I was beginning to think you might change your mind." "I considered it," she admitted. "This is not my world, Mr. Finley." "Garrett," he reminded her. "And whose world is it, if not for those who work the land?" Before she could answer, Eleanor Jensen, the ranch owner's wife, swept Dawn into introductions. Throughout the evening, Dawn noticed how Garrett moved easily among the ranchers and businessmen, respected despite his youth. He spoke intelligently about cattle markets and railroad prospects, but his eyes continuously found hers across the room. Later, as fiddles struck up a lively tune, he appeared before her with an outstretched hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Evans?" "I do not dance well," she protested weakly. "Then we shall not dance well together," he smiled, and something about his easy confidence made it impossible to refuse. As they moved across the floor, Dawn felt herself relaxing for the first time in years. Garrett led with a surprising grace, his hand steady at the small of her back. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked suddenly. His smile faltered. "Is kindness so rare that you must question it?" "In my experience, yes." His eyes darkened. "Then your experience has been unfairly limited." As the evening progressed, Dawn found herself sharing more than she intended about her parents' deaths, the struggling ranch, her plans to leave. Garrett listened without interruption, his attention unwavering. "The West takes much," he acknowledged when she finished. "But it gives an equal measure to those who persist." "You sound very certain for someone so young," she observed. A shadow crossed his face. "I have seen my share of hardship, Dawn. I simply chose to believe there is more to life than mere survival." When he escorted her home under a canopy of stars, Dawn felt the dangerous stirring of hope, a sensation she had methodically extinguished for years. At her door, he took her hand but did not kiss it as she half expected. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked instead. Prudence dictated refusal. Her plans to leave were set. Entanglements would only complicate matters. Yet something in his steady gaze made her hesitate. "Yes," she heard herself say. "You may." That night, Dawn dreamed not of St. Louis drawing rooms, but of Wyoming skies and a pair of sage-green eyes. Over the weeks that followed, Garrett became a constant presence at Evans Creek. He arrived after his duties at the Rocking Jay, helping mend fences, doctor sick cattle, and repair the crumbling homestead. They worked side by side, conversations flowing naturally between them. Dawn learned that Garrett had come west from Pennsylvania after losing his family's farm to debt collectors. He spoke of his dreams to own land someday, to build something lasting in Wyoming Territory. His optimism should have irritated her, but instead, she found it strangely infectious. "Why do you help me?" she asked one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of amber and gold. "You work dawn to dusk at Jensen's, then come here and work more." Garrett was silent for a long moment. "When I first arrived in Wyoming, I was ready to give up. Everything I owned fit in one saddlebag. I was sleeping rough when Jensen found me, gave me work, reminded me that one setback needn't define a life." He turned to face her. "Sometimes people need reminding of their own strength." "You think me strong?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "I think you're the strongest person I've met," he said simply. "Most would have surrendered this place years ago." Something warm blossomed in Dawn's chest. Pride, perhaps, or something dangerously close to affection. As June gave way to July, Dawn quietly postponed her departure for St. Louis. She told herself it was practical. The ranch was showing improvement under their combined efforts. The truth, however, rested in the way her heart quickened when Garrett's horse appeared on the horizon, in the laughter that came more easily with each passing day. One sweltering afternoon, they rode to check fence lines along her northern boundary. Stopping by a small creek for water, Garrett suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Don't move," he whispered. Dawn froze, following his gaze to where a mountain lion crouched on a rocky outcropping, its tawny coat nearly invisible against the stone. "Back toward the horses, slowly," Garrett instructed, his voice calm despite the danger. They had nearly reached their mounts when Dawn's gelding spooked, rearing suddenly. The commotion provoked the cat, which leaped with frightening speed. Garrett pushed Dawn behind him and fired a warning shot. The big cat hesitated, snarling, then bounded away into the undergrowth. In the aftermath, with hearts pounding and hands trembling, Dawn found herself in Garrett's arms, his embrace protective yet gentle. When she looked up, the intensity in his eyes stole her breath more effectively than any fear. "I could have lost you," he murmured, one hand coming up to trace the line of her cheek. When his lips met hers, Dawn knew she was losing the battle against her own heart. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tender yet searching, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, the world seemed irrevocably changed. "I should not have done that," Garrett said, though his eyes suggested no regret. "No," Dawn agreed, her fingers still curled in the fabric of his shirt. "But I am glad you did." As they rode home in companionable silence, Dawn confronted an uncomfortable truth. Leaving Timber Creek would mean leaving Garrett, and that prospect had become unthinkable. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in early August. Dawn was hanging laundry when the messenger from town appeared, a yellow envelope clutched in his hand. "For you, Miss Evans," came from St. Louis. Her cousin's message was brief but clear. The position was filled unless Dawn arrived by month's end. A decision was required immediately. That evening, when Garrett arrived, Dawn handed him the telegram without comment. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "You still mean to go then?" he asked finally. "It is the sensible choice," she said, not meeting his eyes. "The ranch barely supports me, much less." She stopped, unwilling to voice the future that had begun taking shape in her dreams. Garrett's jaw tightened. "And what of us?" "There is no us, Mr. Finley. There are merely two lonely people who found temporary comfort in each other's company." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but Dawn forced herself to continue. "I have nothing to offer you, not wealth, not security, not even a future in this territory. You deserve better than a failing ranch and a woman with empty pockets." Garrett stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Is that what you think I want from you? Property and prospects?" He took her hands in his. "Dawn, I grew up with wealth, watched it destroy my family when it vanished. I know its true value." "Then what do you want?" she whispered. "Only what I cannot buy or build myself." His voice softened. "Your heart is all I need." The simplicity of his declaration undid her careful defenses. For 3 years, Dawn had believed herself a fortress, impenetrable, self-sufficient. Yet here was a man who saw her walls not as barriers but as challenges, who valued not what she possessed, but who she was. "I am afraid," she confessed, the words barely audible. "As am I," he admitted. "But I would rather face uncertainty with you than security without you." That night, beneath a canopy of stars, Dawn allowed herself to believe in something beyond survival, in the possibility of love amidst hardship, of partnership against the unforgiving prairie. The letter to her cousin went out the next morning, declining the position in St. Louis. Their fragile happiness lasted precisely 17 days. On the 18th day, Sheriff Tanner rode to Evans Creek, his expression grim beneath his graying mustache. Dawn's heart froze when she saw him dismount. "Miss Evans, I need a word," he said, removing his hat. "About Garrett Finley." The world tilted beneath her feet. "Has something happened to him?" "No, ma'am." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "But something may happen if certain matters aren't cleared up." He pulled a worn wanted poster from his vest. "This arrived from Pennsylvania yesterday." The likeness was unmistakable, though the name was different. Gabriel Fletcher, wanted for robbery and assault of a bank manager in Philadelphia, 1880. "There must be some mistake," Dawn insisted, though doubt crept like poison through her veins. "Maybe so. But until we know for certain, I'll need to bring him in for questioning. The sheriff replaced his hat. Thought you should hear it from me first, given your association. After he left, Dawn sat motionless on her porch, the wanted poster clutched in her trembling hands. Everything Garrett had told her, his family farm, his journey west, suddenly seemed suspect. Had it all been lies? Was the man she'd grown to love nothing but a carefully constructed fiction? When Garrett arrived that evening, his smile faded at the sight of her tear-streaked face. Dawn, what is it? She handed him the poster wordlessly. His face paled as he stared at his own image, the damning words beneath it. I can explain, he began, his voice hollow. Are you Gabriel Fletcher? She asked, needing to hear it from his lips. A long moment passed. I was, he finally admitted. I am not that man anymore. The confirmation struck like a physical blow. Dawn took a step back, arms wrapped protectively around herself. Tell me everything. Now. The story spilled from him haltingly. How his family's farm had indeed been lost, but to gambling debts his father accrued before drinking himself to death. How Gabriel, young and desperate, had fallen in with a gang of thieves. How during their first and only bank robbery, the manager had reached for a gun, and in the struggle, Gabriel had struck him unconscious. I ran that night, changed my name, headed west. I've spent 3 years trying to atone, to become someone worthy of forgiveness. His eyes pleaded for understanding. I never meant to deceive you, Dawn. When we met, I was already Garrett Finley in my heart. And the bank manager? She asked, voice barely audible. Recovered fully, according to the papers. But I still committed the crime. Dawn turned away, unable to reconcile the man she loved with the criminal before her. Sheriff Tanner is looking for you. He will take you back east for trial. I know. Garrett, or Gabriel, stepped closer. I will not run again. That part of my life is over. As is this. Dawn gestured between them, fighting to keep her voice steady. Whatever existed between us was built on falsehood. No. His voice cracked with emotion. My name was false. My love for you never was. But Dawn had retreated behind her walls once more, the fortress rebuilt in minutes where it had taken months to dismantle. You should go, she said coldly. Sheriff Tanner will be watching the roads out of the territory. Dawn, please, go, she repeated, turning away so he wouldn't see the tears streaming down her face. The sound of his horse galloping away seemed to echo the shattering of her heart. Dawn Evans did not attend the preliminary hearing where Garrett Finley, now confirmed as Gabriel Fletcher, was remanded to custody for transport back to Pennsylvania. She did not join the whispered conversations in town about the criminal cowboy who had fooled them all. Instead, she threw herself into work, exhausting her body to quiet her mind. The days blurred together in a haze of physical labor and emotional numbness. At night, she stared at the ceiling of her lonely bedroom, replaying every word, every touch, searching for signs she had missed. 2 weeks after Garrett's arrest, Mr. Jensen rode to Evans Creek. The older rancher dismounted slowly, his weathered face solemn. Miss Evans, he nodded. Thought you should know they're taking Finley, Fletcher, east tomorrow on the morning train. Dawn nodded stiffly. Thank you for the information, though I fail to see how it concerns me. Jensen studied her for a moment. Known that boy 3 years. Hardest worker I ever hired. Most honest, too, ironically enough. Honest. Dawn couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. He lied about everything. Not everything, Jensen countered. Not about working from sunup to sundown. Not about sending money to the bank manager he hurt, anonymously, through my lawyer in Cheyenne. Dawn's head snapped up. What? Half his wages, every month, for 3 years. Jensen spat tobacco juice into the dust. Man's debt is nearly paid in full, though I reckon that won't matter much to a Pennsylvania judge. Why are you telling me this? Dawn asked, her carefully constructed indifference beginning to crack. Because sometimes people deserve second chances. Jensen mounted his horse with a grunt. Train leaves at 8 sharp. Just thought you should know. After he left, Dawn sat on her porch steps until sunset, wrestling with truths she had been avoiding. Yes, Garrett had lied about his name, his past. But had he lied about who he was now? About his feelings for her? As darkness fell, Dawn remembered his words. Your heart is all I need. She had offered him nothing else. No wealth, no prospects. Yet he had chosen her anyway. Perhaps, in that at least, there had been truth. Sleep eluded her that night as she paced her small house, memories washing over her like waves. Garrett laughing as they repaired the barn roof. His gentleness with a newborn calf. The way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, as though she were something precious, irreplaceable. By dawn, Dawn Evans had made her decision. The Timber Creek station was little more than a wooden platform and a telegraph office, bustling with unusual activity as townsfolk gathered to witness the departure of their local outlaw. Dawn arrived as the eastbound train huffed into view, black smoke billowing against the morning sky. Sheriff Tanner stood beside his prisoner, whose hands were shackled before him. Garrett looked thinner, his face stubbled, but he stood straight-backed and dignified despite his circumstances. Dawn pushed through the crowd, heart pounding in her chest. "Sheriff," she called, breathless from her hurried ride. "I need a moment with the prisoner." Tanner hesitated, then nodded. "Train's loading. Make it quick." As she approached, Garrett's eyes widened with shock, then softened with something like resignation. "You came to say goodbye," he said, a statement rather than a question. "No." Dawn stood before him, chin raised defiantly. "I came to say I will wait." Confusion crossed his features. "Dawn, you lied about your name, about your past," she acknowledged. "But Mr. Jensen told me what you've been doing with your wages. About the restitution." A flush crept up Garrett's neck. "That was private. It was honorable," she countered. "The action of a man seeking redemption, not escape." The train whistle blew, signaling imminent departure. "I have to go," he said, pain evident in his eyes. Dawn reached for his shackled hands. "I will write to the judge in Pennsylvania. I will explain how you have lived these 3 years. And when your sentence is served, I will be here." Hope and disbelief warred on his face. "Dawn, it could be years. Then it will be years." She stepped closer, uncaring of the watching crowd. "You asked what I wanted. I want a man who faces his past rather than running from it. I want you, Gabriel Fletcher." His name on her lips, his true name, seemed to break something within him. Tears gathered in his eyes. "I have nothing to offer you," he whispered, echoing her words from weeks before. Dawn smiled through her own tears. "Your heart is all I need." When she kissed him, the crowd's murmurs faded to nothing. In that moment, there was only the two of them, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, who had chosen love despite its cost. Sheriff Tanner cleared his throat awkwardly. "Time to board, Finley. Fletcher." As Garrett was led to the train, he looked back once. "I will return to you," he called, a promise carried on the Wyoming wind. "And I will be waiting," Dawn answered, standing tall on the platform as the train pulled away, taking her heart east with it. Wyoming Territory, 1886. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Evans Creek Ranch, where fresh white paint gleamed on the barn and new fencing enclosed expanded pastures. A herd of cattle, triple the size of 3 years prior, grazed contentedly on summer grass. Dawn Evans, now 25, stood on her porch, reading a letter for perhaps the 100th time. The paper was worn at the creases, the writing familiar and beloved. "Judge reduced my sentence in light of character testimonies and proof of restitution. Release date now set for September 15th. Will board westbound train immediately. Count the days with me, my love. 63 until I hold you again." The sound of approaching hooves drew her attention. A rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. Dawn's heart quickened as she shaded her eyes, scarcely daring to hope. The figure drew closer, features becoming distinct. Broad shoulders, light brown hair longer than she remembered, sage-green eyes that had haunted her dreams for 3 long years. Dawn dropped the letter, gathering her skirts as she ran down the steps and across the yard. Gabriel, slid from his horse in one fluid motion, catching her as she flung herself into his arms. "You're early," she gasped between kisses. The letter said September. "Good behavior," he laughed, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently on her feet. His eyes drank in the sight of her, hands framing her face as though she might disappear. "God, I've missed you. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days, she whispered, having counted every one. His expression grew serious. "I'm Gabriel Fletcher now, legally, officially. No more secrets, no more lies. Just a man with a second chance, if you'll still have me." In answer, Dawn took his hand and led him toward the house, their house, as she had come to think of it during the long months of waiting. On the porch swing sat a small wooden box she'd placed there that morning, somehow knowing today would be different. "What's this?" he asked as she handed it to him. "Open it." Inside lay a deed, Evans Creek Ranch, now registered to Don Evans and Gabriel Fletcher, joint owners. "I cannot accept this," he protested. "This land is your legacy." Don smiled, taking his hands in hers. "And now it is our future." She guided his fingers to the swell of her abdomen, visible now beneath her dress. "All of ours." His eyes widened with wonder. "Your?" "For months along," she confirmed. "Our letters created more than just hope, it seems." Gabriel fell to his knees before her, pressing his forehead against the evidence of their love. When he looked up, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "I came here with nothing but a changed name and a dream of redemption," he said, voice thick with emotion. "How is it possible I found everything I never dared wish for?" Dawn drew him to his feet, her smile radiant in the golden light of sunset. "Because you recognized what I could not, that even in the harshest places, love takes root. That even broken people can build something whole." As the Wyoming dusk wrapped around them like a blanket, Gabriel and Dawn stood together on the porch of their home. No longer two solitary souls fighting against the frontier, but partners facing whatever came next, side by side. They had offered each other the only thing that truly mattered in the end, not land or livestock or material wealth, but hearts open despite fear, love stronger than doubt, and the courage to believe that even in the wild, untamed West, some promises were kept. Some promises were worth waiting for.